Before we dive into today's intense story, a quick reminder. Over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but aren't subscribed. If you enjoy content like this, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And if you find this story gripping, don't forget to like the video. It really helps us out. I never imagined I'd be the kind of woman to sit down and tell a story like this. Maybe that's how all of us feel, till life pushes us into a place we swore we'd never go. I used to believe in love, the enduring, steady kind you build day by day, year after year. I thought I had that with Daniel. He was my husband, my partner, my compass. For 12 years, I walked beside him through the storms and sunshine. I built a home with him. One where laughter echoed off the walls and dreams were supposed to find shelter. And yet, I found myself drowning in betrayal I never saw coming. It started subtly, like a fog creeping in at dawn. Little things dot the way. Daniel used to linger after work to kiss me hello. That stopped. His phone, once forgotten on the kitchen counter, was now glued to him like an extra limb. Late-night messages, chuckles he wouldn't explain. Hushed calls taken on the porch. At first, I told myself he was just stressed, maybe overwhelmed with his job at the marketing firm, but the pit in my stomach told a different story. I ignored it for weeks, then months. The change in our home was undeniable. He'd come home and barely look at me. His dinners went cold on the table while he scrolled endlessly. I asked questions. I tried being gentle, then direct, then angry. He always brushed it off. Tired, deadlines, nothing to worry about. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I knew him too well. I knew the sound of his lies even when his words seemed polished. One night after he fell asleep on the couch with his phone clutched tight, I did something I hadn't done in 12 years. I went through his messages. It felt like crossing a line I swore I never would. But what I found obliterated every illusion I was still clinging to. Her name was Alicia Younger. Ambitious, charming in that curated social media way. Their messages were filled with emotional intimacy, confessions, flirtations, dreams. They were apparently making together. They had been seeing each other for nearly a year. A year my hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone. I stared at him, passed out peacefully as if he hadn't just annihilated everything we'd built. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there, hollowed out until the sun rose. The next morning, I didn't confront him. I watched him eat the breakfast I made like everything was normal. I watched him kiss my cheek like he was still the man I married. And then I decided, I would not give him the satisfaction of a breakdown. He would not see me beg or plead. He would not get to be the victim of my hurt. If he wanted to lie, then I would lie too. I smiled. I played the role, but in my mind, I was already rewriting the ending to our story. I started gathering information. Quietly, carefully, I backed up every message, every email, every proof of their affair. I contacted a lawyer and began preparing for the moment I would leave. But not just leave. I would make sure when I walked away, I would do so with my dignity intact and his world crumbling behind me. The same time, I started working on myself. I knew I couldn't win a battle if I was broken, so I focused on my career. I'd been an assistant manager at a nonprofit, underpaid and overworked. But I took extra hours, took on difficult clients, and within months, I was promoted. I saved money in a separate account he didn't know existed. I built my foundation quietly while he thought I was still blind. Then came the day that changed everything. I discovered that Alicia was not just a fling. She was actively trying to replace me. I found out Daniel had brought her to his company's Christmas party, claiming we had mutually separated. He had fabricated a story about how we had grown apart and decided to part ways. He portrayed himself as a devoted husband who tried everything, while I was the cold, distant wife who chose her career over marriage. That lie, it ignited something in me I didn't know I had. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was assassinating my character to justify it. That's when I knew he didn't deserve mercy. I played my part flawlessly. I cooked his favorite meals. I laughed at his dry jokes. I even planned a romantic weekend getaway for us, something I hadn't done in years. He thought I was falling in love again. The truth was, I was building my alibi. On that trip, I took photos of us, of him, of receipts and check-ins, evidence to support my upcoming legal steps. I wanted the court to see a clear timeline. I wanted there to be no doubt that I was the one holding this marriage together while he was dismantling it behind closed doors. When we returned, I set my plan in motion. I waited until he left for a business dinner with Alicia, one I had already confirmed through a GPS tracking app I installed on his car. I packed everything I needed, not just clothes or personal items, but files, records, financial statements. I left behind only a single envelope on the dining table. Inside that envelope were two things: copies of the messages between him and Alicia and divorce papers already signed on my end. I didn't leave a note. I didn't leave an explanation. I let the evidence speak for itself. Then I walked away. It wasn't the end, of course. It was only the beginning. He called me 37 times in one night. I didn't answer a single one. The silence hurt him more than any words ever could. He showed up at my sister's house where I was staying, begging to talk. He said he was confused, that it didn't mean anything, that Alicia was just a mistake, that he missed me. Ellie? That he still loved me, but it was too late. I filed everything through the courts the next morning. My lawyer delivered everything like clockwork. The judge saw the messages, the timeline, the photographs, the financial discrepancies. Daniel had drained a chunk of our joint savings on gifts and hotel stays with Alicia. Enough that the judge sided with me in the property division and spousal support. His perfect little lie unraveled in court. Alicia was subpoenaed for testimony. She tried to play innocent, but the evidence was overwhelming. She lost her job. Apparently, dating a married executive was against company policy when public trust was involved. Daniel, humiliated and financially bleeding, tried to save face, but the damage was irreversible. I didn't gloat. I didn't taunt. I moved into a small apartment with a balcony and a garden box. Started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. I met people who didn't know me as Daniel's wife, and it felt like breathing for the first time in years. But the story isn't over. Not yet. Revenge isn't always a dramatic explosion. Sometimes quiet, deliberate, and complete. And Daniel hadn't yet felt the full weight of what he had done. The weeks that followed my departure were strange. Quiet in a way that made me nervous at first. I expected retaliation. I expected Daniel to come at me with legal tricks or manipulative guilt trips. But instead, he vanished into a silence that made me suspicious. I knew him too well to believe he'd accept defeat with grace, so I stayed ready, always expecting something. Sure enough, it came. Not directly, but in small, intentional. He started reaching out to mutual friends, spinning stories that painted him as a man lost in the ruins of a broken marriage. According to him, I had always been distant, obsessed with work, cold, and emotionally unavailable. It was his way of justifying what he did. I could see it coming from miles away. But what he didn't understand was that I had already prepared for this too. Before I left him, I'd spent time reconnecting with people he had subtly pushed me away from. Old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Family members who had always sensed something was off. I let them in, not with drama, not with bitterness, but with truth. I shared pieces of what I discovered, not to gossip, but to reclaim my voice. By the time Daniel began whispering his version of events, it was too late. Most people already knew the real story. He tried to get to me through my job next. An anonymous complaint was filed about me being emotionally unstable and inappropriately involved with clients. I knew it came from him or someone doing his bidding, but I had already told my boss everything. carefully, professionally. I kept records, and the attempt backfired. My team rallied around me. The complaint was dismissed, and Daniel lost another sliver of control over my life. It was around that time I received a message from Alicia. It wasn't what I expected. There was no apology, no regret, just a single paragraph accusing me of ruining Daniel's career, manipulating the courts, and being pathetic enough to need revenge to feel powerful. For a moment, I stared at the message, amused. Alicia thought this was about her. She thought I left my marriage and scorched Daniel's life because I couldn't stand losing to a younger woman. The irony was almost laughable. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Revenge wasn't about making her cry or watching her life fall apart. It was about reclaiming mine, about making sure Daniel paid for what he did, not through screaming matches or broken windows, but through silence, strength, and the undeniable consequences of his actions. By now, the divorce was finalized. I had full control over our former home. He'd given up his claim in exchange for a reduced spousal payout, thinking I wouldn't want to stay there. But I did, not because of the memories, but because it represented everything I'd invested in. The work, the sacrifices, the years of love he threw away. I wasn't going to let him have it. I had the place professionally cleaned, redecorated, repainted. Every trace of Daniel was gone. I turned the master bedroom into a studio. I filled the walls with art, light, music. I invited friends over for dinner, laughter filling the space. That used to echo with silence. That house, once a tomb for my unhappiness, became a place of rebirth. Meanwhile, Daniel's life was falling apart, quietly, steadily. His company had put him on probation after discovering he had misused funds on personal trips, some of which included Alicia. When the internal audit wrapped up, he was let go. It wasn't public, but the professional community whispered. His name had become synonymous with liability. Alicia, unemployed and scrambling, tried to pivot their image into a power couple starting a business together. It failed within 3 months. Friends who once praised him avoided him now. He was no longer the charming executive with the perfect marriage. He was a cautionary tale. But none of that gave me joy, not really. Revenge was never about joy. It was about justice, balance, making. Sure, I didn't walk away empty-handed while he built a new life on the ruins of mine. Then something happened that shifted everything again. My younger sister called me one evening. Her voice was tight. She told me Daniel had reached out to her, claiming he was still in love with me and trying to make things right. That was his new strategy. Redemption, not for love. Daniel didn't know how to love anyone but himself. But for image, he needed to look like the good guy again. He needed to be forgiven so people would stop seeing him as the villain. He wanted a second chance, not because he had changed, but because he had lost everything. So I gave him a second chance, but on my terms. I agreed to meet him. A public cafe. No emotions, no pretense, just a conversation. When he saw me, he looked different, not physically, but spiritually. He was smaller somehow, as if the weight of everything had finally sunk in. He started with apologies, some rehearsed, some real. He said he didn't know what he was doing, that he was lost, that he thought I didn't love him anymore. He said Alicia had meant nothing, that he realized too late what he had done. I listened. I didn't interrupt. And when he finished, I thanked him. Not for the apology, but for the clarity. I told him I didn't hate him. I didn't even wish him harm. I told him the truth, that I had loved him deeply once, and that losing him had hurt more than I could ever explain. But I also told him I would never ever let him back into my life. Not as a friend, not as a partner, not even as an occasional memory. He had burned that bridge, not with one mistake, but with 1,000 small betrayals, lies, manipulations. I paid the bill and walked away. And for the first time, I felt weightless. That night, I started writing again. I had always wanted to write a book, but life kept getting in the way. Now, with a clear mind and a sharpened voice, I began putting my story on paper. Not for pity, not for revenge, but for others like me. Women who were told to stay quiet. Who were told to forgive, to endure, to settle. I wanted to show them what it looked like to survive. To walk away with your head high. To lose everything and still win. My story wasn't over. But the part with Daniel, that was finally done. Life moved on, as it always does. Seasons changed. People came and went. And somehow in the aftermath of everything, I found peace. It didn't happen all at once. Healing never does. Some days I woke up with a pit in my stomach, unsure of who I was now that the roles I clung to, wife, partner, caretaker, were no longer mine. Other days I found myself laughing again, really laughing, like I hadn't in years. Not at Daniel's jokes, not at forced smiles, but with people who saw me, listened to me, and valued me. I finished writing my book. It wasn't a bestseller. It didn't win awards, but it found its readers, women who wrote to me from places I'd never visited, who said my story gave them the strength to leave, to fight, to rebuild. That meant more to me than any courtroom victory or financial settlement. Still, part of me remained watchful. Trauma makes you cautious. Even in peace, you listen for war. Months passed, then a year. Then came the message I never expected. From Alicia. It had been over a year since the last time I heard her name. Her tone this time was different. There was no arrogance. No veiled insults. It's just a brief, quiet message. I'm sorry, you were right. I didn't see it then. I do now. I stared at those words for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part of me, the part that had grown, evolved, shed the bitterness, felt something different. Not sympathy, not forgiveness, but understanding. She'd fallen for the same charm, the same manipulations, the same hollow promises. Daniel hadn't changed with her. He had simply followed the same pattern. Apparently they'd broken up. Or more accurately, she'd left him after discovering he was seeing someone else. Again, she had walked the same path I did, just faster. With fewer illusions to lose, I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. But I wished her peace, silently. Not because she deserved it, because I deserved the freedom of not carrying that weight. Anymore? Daniel reached out again around the holidays. A simple email, no subject line. No apology, just an empty greeting and a vague hope that maybe one day we can talk. I blocked him. He hadn't learned, and I wasn't going to spend one more second trying to teach a man who didn't want to grow. Meanwhile, my life had blossomed into something I never saw coming. I started teaching creative writing workshops at a local community center. At first, I did it for the extra income, but it quickly became more than that. My students, women and men from all walks of life, started sharing pieces of their own journeys, stories of loss, resilience, betrayal, and triumph. Week after week, I watched them find their voices. In helping them heal, I continued healing too. Then came Thomas. He wasn't a knight in shining armor or some grand romantic twist. He was a quiet, patient man with kind eyes and a broken past. Of his own, we met at a volunteer event. He liked books. I liked gardens. We ended up trading those interests and spending long afternoons talking about nothing and everything. I didn't fall for him quickly. After Daniel, I was cautious, even skeptical. But Thomas wasn't in a rush. He didn't try to fix me or sweep me off my feet. He showed up consistently, genuinely, and that, in time, built something new. He never asked for details about my past, but when I chose to share them, he listened. He didn't offer cliches or apologies on Daniel's behalf. He simply acknowledged the pain and admired the strength it took to come out the other side. We didn't jump into labels or plans. We just allowed the connection to grow at its own pace. It felt real, not perfect, but honest. Still, I never forgot who I was before all of this. The woman who once stood in her kitchen, shattered by a truth she couldn't unsee. The one who left with nothing but a plan and her pride. I kept her close. She reminded me never to settle again. Not for love, not for acceptance, not for convenience. There were times I'd drive past the building where Daniel used to work. It had been sold, renamed, a whole new team worked there now. The past had been scrubbed clean, just like him. Trying to rewrite his narrative with each new relationship, each new excuse. But I didn't care anymore. He had become just another story in a long line of lessons. He no longer held any power over me. The final piece of my journey came when I was invited to speak at a women's conference. The theme was resilience. I stood in front of a room full of strangers, palms sweating, heart pounding. But as I looked into their eyes, each woman carrying her own weight, I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I didn't talk about revenge. I didn't talk about betrayal. I talked about rebirth, about how we are allowed to start over, not just once, but as many times as we need, about how love isn't just something you give to someone else. It's something you learn to give back to yourself. I talked about how survival isn't weak, it's brave, and how walking away from someone who doesn't value you is not failure. It's freedom. When I finished, they stood. Not because my story was extraordinary, but because it was theirs too. And in that moment, I felt it closure. Not the kind that comes with slamming doors or final words. It's the kind that settles in your bones. The kind that says, you made it. You're free. Today, I water my plants on the balcony of the home I rebuilt. I write, teach. I love myself. Others the future. I still carry scars, but they no longer sting. They remind me of the battles I won, of the woman I chose to become. I don't think of Daniel anymore. I think of the girl I used to be. And I thank her for walking through the fire so I could stand in the light. This is my story. Not of loss, but of becoming.